Welcome back, nonprofit friends, to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm your host, Tosha Anderson, and today I'm going to be sitting down with Mandy Moody. Mandy, you are the CEO and founder of ODEO Consulting, right? Did I say that okay? Did I say that right?
ODEO, and I'll give a little
ODEO.
nod to why we're ODEO. Yeah.
Please, yes.
Yeah, so ODEO really came from an acronym that I used to describe myself throughout my career, Only Development Officer, ODO, because I
Okay.
spent my career in small nonprofits scaling them. And so when I was thinking about my business name, I thought this is it.
Oh, I love that. Oh, and I can go off on a whole separate tangent, but that's kind of the charity CFO. Like, look, I am just an accountant. Like, I cannot be all of the things to all of the people all of the time. So,
Yeah.
I can really respect that as someone else that has worked for small nonprofits and wore many, many hats. Okay. Today, though, we're going to be, fittingly talking about fundraising, and we're going to be talking about your new ebook called the 4P Formula. And you are going to talk to us a little bit more about how nonprofit leaders can get off this fundraising hamster wheel,
Mhm.
feeling a little less last minute, frantic, overwhelmed, hopefully, by this whole process. Mandy, you're going to give us very specific strategies on how you have helped scale organizations from 750,000 to 2 million and some of your experiences working in and around the fundraising space. And hopefully it helps some of our nonprofit leaders with their strategy on fundraising, because I think this is more relevant of a conversation. It's always been a very relevant conversation, right? But especially now, in light of some of the continued funding challenges that nonprofit leaders are experiencing, and knowing the shift is going to be moving more and more in the direction of philanthropic, community, individual donors, foundations, et cetera, as we brace ourselves for less and less dependent on some of those government contracts. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us and having
Yeah,
this
thanks for
conversation. And thank you for sharing your book, 4P Formula. So let's dive right in. So you and your book, you mentioned your biggest breakthrough came when you slowed down to speed up. So tell us more about what that looked like for you. What does that mean for you?
For sure. So, when I really honed in on this formula, I was actually serving as an executive director. And
Okay.
anyone listening who has been an ODO, an only development officer or an executive director, you know that every day there is something on your plate and it all feels really urgent. And it's
Mm,
because oftentimes it is. Oftentimes there are so many time sensitive opportunities that are coming across. And so you never really sit down and focus on, wait a second,
right.
what am I doing? Where are we going? What's the plan? What's the strategy? And that really shows up in donor conversations. They see how frantic and hectic you are, even if you think that you're feigning this sense of calm. And so
Hmm.
slowing down to speed up really means that I took a step back from the crazy day to day, and really spent some time intentionally thinking about what problem did we exist to solve,
Hmm.
how are our programs aligned with that problem? Were there
Yeah.
any that weren't, that we needed to think about
Hmm.
ditching? What was our plan? And we can get more into what I specifically mean about plan. And then how was I actually inviting people in to purposefully invest in our mission?
Mm.
Once I had that down, that framework down, um, the conversations that I had with donors were totally transformed.
Wow.
And therefore, we started scaling in incredible ways after having such a stagnant budget for about a decade. So it wasn't that we didn't have the right folks in the community wanting to contribute. It's that we
Hmm.
weren't sharing our message in a way that really resonated with them and attracted them to give their best gift to the organization.
Okay, now you've got my attention, because the whole slowing down to speed up, I can really appreciate and relate to, and it sounds very counterintuitive. And I just always envision, like, when we talk about things sometimes on this podcast, like, well, leaders need to do this and leaders need to do that, and we need to like slow down to speed up. Like, if I were in their situation, the level of eye rolling that I would do, I would be afraid my
Yeah.
eyes would like get stuck somewhere in the back of my head, because you and I both worked for nonprofits, and we've both obviously run our own businesses now. And the level of just, I call it whack-a-mole, the
Yeah.
whack-a-mole in
Yeah.
that leaders of businesses, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, but I think especially nonprofit leaders are experiencing. on an ongoing basis is just completely overwhelming at best. So I like this idea of slowing down to speed up, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. So let's talk about, hopefully, I'm guessing the secret to the ability to like slow down and speed up is this concept of the 4P formula that you reference in your book. Can you walk us through what this 4P formula is?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think I'll start before I talking about what the four P's are. Is I totally agree with you, right? I'm sure folks listening, they're like, wait, should we listen to the
Stop
rest?
it.
Because that's cute that you think I have time to talk
Right.
about,
Exactly.
especially now when there are
Yeah.
all of these
Chaos.
federal funding issues and everything. But what I like to talk with my clients about is you really don't have time not to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you are not being efficient. If you can take this moment to really dial in on your four P's, you will be just like speeding through and really
Mm-hmm.
able to make great impact. So the four P's, again, they're problem, program, plan, and purposeful investment. So we
Okay.
start with the problem. What I find is that oftentimes a leader or a fundraiser will think that they are communicating and conveying a problem statement to
Mm-hmm.
a donor, but oftentimes they gloss over it, right? Because we live in this crisis all the time. And
Right.
so we might be speaking in acronyms, we might be
Yes.
glossing over the fact that there is this problem. Um, and so the donor is left being like, wait a second, why do you actually
What?
have a need? What's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
I refer to this sometimes as DX before RX, right?
Mm-hmm.
Diagnose before prescribing. If they
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the problem is, if you haven't diagnosed for them, hey, folks who are receiving SNAP benefits, they don't have enough money to last them until the end of the month. And
Mm-hmm.
here are the stats, and here's what is really happening with real people. They might not
Mm-hmm.
understand why you have a program to
Right.
match your nutrition
Mm-hmm.
incentives. And so, really taking that moment to articulate and test with your closest donors. Hey, I want to talk with you about this new way that I want to articulate the problem. Will you gut
Right.
check me when I'm
Right.
speaking in an acronym or I gloss over something? Like, hold me accountable when you're confused, and I'm not going to judge that you don't know what I'm talking about. I'm judging
Mm-hmm.
myself that I've not been clear, and I want to
Right.
be able to get clear. I was so fortunate to have a donor once really like stop me in the middle of a conversation and say, hold up, can you
What are you
tell
talking
me like what's SNAP, you know? And this is somebody who is super passionate about food access, and
about?
SNAP
Sure.
is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance
Yeah.
Program. So we had to really slow down, get like name that problem statement for our donors, and then they are ready to understand your programs. They can make
Yeah.
connections back and understand why you are doing what you're doing. So start with that program. And in the ebook, I give a formula that you can pop into Chat GPT. I'm a big Chat GPT
Oh, I love
fan,
this already.
that can spit back out for you some examples, right? So that you're not caught with
Mm-hmm.
that blank page syndrome. I don't know if I'm speaking about this well. Where would I even start? So folks can find that formula, pop it into ChatGPT right in the book.
I love
Um,
this. Yes.
then you go to program, right? Once you've got your problem statement really clearly defined, you talk about how your work specifically addresses that problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that there are folks who think that they're doing this, but maybe aren't doing it to the depth that really helps their donors understand the uniqueness around your program, right? And why you specifically are best equipped to handle the work that you are handling. So
Mm-hmm.
that when you're talking about your programs, you need to be able to talk about proof of concept, right? Here's what we actually did and what actually resulted for others. If you're newer, right? If you don't have that proof of
Mm-hmm.
concept, you need to be creative in how you address that conversation with a donor. But you should have some research, some stories, some data, some stats, all of that to back up why your programs are specifically structured the way that they are.
Mm.
This is also a really good opportunity to reflect on if all of your programs are indeed programs, number one. Are they
Right.
programs or are they projects, right? Program is
Hmm.
ongoing, a project has a defined end. But sometimes we refer to our projects as programs, and that gets confusing for the
Right.
donor.
Or like pilot projects that are
Yeah,
maybe going to be programs.
exactly. And
Yeah,
this doesn't mean you can never talk about projects, right? But you need to be
sure.
explicit and understand yourself. Like, what am I actually asking for here? It also gives you an opportunity to really reflect on, is everything that we're doing really impactful, right?
Hmm.
Everything with the 4P formula, it kind of bridges this gap between fundraising and like program evaluation, mission impact evaluation, right? Because it allows
Hmm.
you to reflect back on and make sure that the programs that you have in place are doing what you want them to do. Because if they're not, how are you going to talk to a donor about it, right? They're going to
Sure.
tune out immediately. Um, then I like to talk about your plan. And I think, Tosha, you're going to really like, your eyes are going to perk up about the budget piece
I
of
love a
things.
plan. I love a plan
Yes,
with numbers. Yes.
yes. So, when I think about budgets, there's a couple of different things that I like to talk to clients about. And that is, one, are you budgeting to your actual strategic vision?
Mm,
And is it fully funded, right? And what I mean by fully funded is, we're not just talking to our donors about direct program costs. We're talking to them about all those indirect costs that go into ensuring that this program can happen. That's your
hmm.
people, that's your tech, that's your rent on your office, that's your insurance.
Right.
You're not going to specifically walk them through all of those boring pieces, but when you show them the budget,
Yeah.
those costs are going to be baked into the program budget. Um, and I help nonprofits really look at, are we just planning our programs in a way that are like just getting by, right? That
Yes.
stagnant way of thinking. Or
Hmm.
are we getting donors excited about, hey, this year we're going to scale in this way. And in order to do that, we've budgeted for X new people or a particular technology. And we want you along with us on this journey to make
Hmm.
this come to life. When you do that, people all of a sudden really start to think of you as a more business minded, financially savvy leader. And that's so
Hmm.
important, because, as you know, we were talking just before we kind of hopped on the podcast today, that folks who are giving those major gifts, they're financially savvy. They know their,
Yeah.
and it is rare for the person at the other side of the table to meet them with that same level and depth of financial literacy and understanding. And when you
Hmm.
do, I have to tell you, like, donors would specifically call out, like, man, you really know your stuff. You know,
Right.
this is exciting. Like, and what if we
Hmm.
did this, right? And be prepared for those opportunities, because all of a sudden they're looking at you like, oh, okay, she knows what's
Right.
going on.
Right. They've done their homework. They've done their homework. They know what they need. And I love your comment about, is this the budget that, it's fully funded or is it barely getting by? Yes. The answer is yes, it's barely getting by. Oftentimes, because I think there's a bit of nervousness of, we don't want to ask for too much or we don't want to be too forward, especially if this is kind of a new donor, or maybe this is a much bigger gift than we've asked for in the past. But I've definitely sat in on conversations where the full ask wasn't made and we knew this was a barely getting by budget. And I think that we would have been honest with the fact that, hey, this is a budget, but it's going to be really tricky because this budget reflects like no raises for like the third year in a row for our program staff. And likely we're going to end up losing some of these individuals, which could, hinder our ability to continue with the quality or, the quality of the program, much less scalability. Because if you don't have, tenured staff that will kind of stick around and continue, to grow the program, then scalability is like out the window. If
Totally. You're starting from
you
scratch.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so many times I've seen like this is barely enough, or not even enough to get by, which is a whole nother thing. I want to get through the rest of the formula, but
Yeah,
that's a
no.
whole nother
It's
conversation.
yeah, but it is so important, right? Because I think that, and I have found that actually, increasingly donors, are really willing, when you have those numbers to back up what you're saying, they're
Mhm.
increasingly open to the common sense, right, approach of saying, hey, if we don't, why is your wages line so large? Well, first
Mhm.
of all, if you're baking what needs to be baked into programs, the administration and the fundraising elements, They look better on paper to those donors. But if you still get that pushback of like, why do you need that extra person? You are then able to more clearly articulate, hey, we don't want to just turn and burn the
Right.
typical 9 to 12 months that you get to
Whoops.
keep a
Right.
development professional.
Yeah.
We want to build on that, or we want to build on our program staff, and here's how we're going to do that effectively. So your strategic plan, right? It starts with that fully funded budget. And I have a whole nother, like we could do a whole nother podcast on how you create that. I use an approach that I call CGV budgeting, where we look at what a crisis budget would be. Oh my gosh, COVID happens and
Mm-hmm.
all my funding drops out. What is the most
Mm-hmm.
important mission critical stuff that we need to have to keep going? Our growth budget. What is that fully funded budget that looks like exciting growth? And I'll talk about growth in a minute because I don't always mean getting bigger,
Mm-hmm.
getting
Mm-hmm.
better. And then
Right.
visionary. You want to be prepared for that visionary budget of like, okay, this
Mm.
is this year, but I want you, donor, to envision like, here's where we want to go in the next 3 or so years. And you never know if they change their gift from 10,000 to 50,000 because they get really excited about that vision and they
Right.
want to help get you there faster.
Mm-hmm.
So CGV budgeting is a really impactful way to go even one step deeper and further to let your donors know, hey, we're prepared on both ends of the extreme, but this is what we're talking about with you today,
Mm.
and you can
Mm-hmm.
be a part of that plan.
Love
Um,
that.
in the ebook, I talk about strategic as an acronym. So,
Mm-hmm.
strategic for me means when you're thinking about your budget, your program metrics, anything that is related to the running and the operations of your nonprofit, it should be strategic. And what that stands for is sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not chase every little thing under the sun because then everyone is burnt out and miserable and the mission
Yes.
suffers. Tracked. Everything needs to be tracked, right? We need to have documented SOPs. We need to have documented metrics
Right.
so that folks can see on paper where we're headed, documented project plans. And a lot of folks who tell me, oh my gosh, I don't have time to slow down to speed up in that way. Just start writing out what you're doing, right? Don't try to plan ahead
Mm-hmm.
necessarily if you can't yet, but document what you're doing so that when you do have that moment of, respite, right? For
Mm-hmm.
a few moments,
Right.
you can go back and think about, hey, this worked, this didn't. Next time I want to do that a couple of weeks earlier. So tracked needs to be realistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be ambitious, but we need to be realistic so that again,
Right.
we're not stretching people past their capacity. We're stretching them to growth, but not past their capacity. Aligned, aligned with your mission. Is the stuff you're doing
Mm-hmm.
actually mission aligned? And you would be surprised by how many things, especially in these smaller nonprofits, right? We think we have to
Yeah.
do everything for everyone. Otherwise,
Right.
they walk away.
Right.
Let them walk away because you are laser focused on this mission and vision, and you need to make sure everything you're doing is aligned. So ask yourself that as you are, even sitting at an email. Is this email that I'm responding to aligned with my mission? Do I need to be spending time on this right now, or can I put it on the back burner? Time bound, that's pretty typical, right? We need to be able to light
Mm-hmm.
those fires underneath of us,
Yes.
have some deadlines.
Right.
Equitable, we want to look at and reflect, is our budget plan, is our program plan, how is our staffing plan, our HR, is it based in equity?
Mm-hmm.
Growth oriented, right? And when I talk about growth oriented, this is what I'm harkening back to, is I don't always mean bigger. Sometimes
Right.
making better. Growth can be deepening. It can be improving on a process. It doesn't necessarily always mean, when I was executive director at Chicago's Green City Market, we grew our market program, our farmers market program, from having 100,000 people come per year to over
Mm-hmm.
600,000 people per year.
Wow. Yeah.
Stellar, right? But even more exciting on the back end of things is my staff were far less burnt out because we had systems and structures in place
Right.
to make that program operate a lot more efficiently.
Right.
Uh, Informed, last two are informed. So they need to be informed by that data. There needs to be a proven need, right, for the thing that we're doing. And then last, community focused. So informed comes from like that external data, the research, and then community informed comes from who are we actually serving here,
Hmm.
right? We want to make sure that those voices are at the table, because your solutions may not be meeting their actual desired need. And unless you have the community at the table, you're missing a critical chunk. So sustainable, tracked, realistic, aligned, time bound, equitable, growth oriented, informed, and community focused. When you are thinking about your program plans, your budget, your everything, thinking through in this strategic minded way, again, donors will really relate and react. Then we get to the last step, purposeful investment, right? This is
Hmm.
where we're asking people to give their most purposeful, intentional, they have to think about it gift. And this can be for your major and your transformational donors all the way down to your annual appeal, direct appeal, social donors as well. How are you conveying the ask in a way
Hmm.
that invites them to reflect? This
Mm.
is important to me. I want to really make sure that I'm giving my best gift and that I'm giving it with the frequency that I can really, contribute. And that is just a different way than thinking about it in terms of like, I don't know, should we ask for X, Y, or Z? It's like, no, like
Yeah.
get your hands out of the donor's pockets. They will tell you.
Right.
They'll tell you if it's too
Oh, I
much.
love that. I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody once said to me, don't try to tell someone else that they can't afford it or what their
Yeah.
budget is. And, it's kind of like sales training 101. But if you think about it through the lens of fundraising, like don't assume that you know what people can give or want to give, and really kind of trust that they'll make that decision for themselves. I
That's
love
right.
that.
Yeah, that's right.
Purposeful
And
gift.
we find that folks, when they have been taken through this intentional process, they really understand the problem that your organization exists to solve. They
Hmm.
understand your programs and how you are uniquely equipped to do this thing. And then they understand that you have a super strong plan. You know your stuff, you know your numbers, you
Hmm.
know what's going to happen if a crisis hits, but you also know what's going to happen if they write you that unexpected $1 million check. You know what you're going to do with
Right.
it. Um,
Hmm.
and then they are just, it's almost like a very natural next step that purposeful investment, all of a sudden it changes from, oh my gosh, I have to ask so and so for a donation, to no, I'm inviting them to like come on this awesome amazing journey with us. And how exciting.
Hmm.
And they
Hmm.
get excited too. It's a very different vibe, when you're
Yeah,
having these types of conversations.
I can absolutely see that, which kind of I think naturally dovetails into, the next conversation I want to have about your book. You say that cultivation and stewardship should be 70% of the donor cycle.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about nurturing these gifts, nurturing these relationships. Talk to us more about that.
Yeah. So in the book, you'll see, I've got little models, right, of identification, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, stewardship, closing the gift. Um, and I think that especially folks, and now I'm really like, dev directors and EDs, like perk up and listen if you are frustrated with board members who are like, I don't want to be a part of the fundraising. I don't like to ask people for money.
Yeah.
That's not my deal. Cool. Well, that's only 10% of what the true donor cycle should be. And oftentimes we see it as this like equally divided pie where we're spending the same amount of time or giving the same energy to all of those things. And that's not true. Cultivation and stewardship are the most important pieces. And when you do that well, when you have a really true relationship with the person that you are going to be inviting to give, and I like to say, instead of asking, you're inviting them, right? You're
Hmm.
bringing them closer to you to give. Um, it feels different, right? It's like oftentimes I don't want my board members to necessarily ask, right? So like
Right.
board members, let me allay your fears. You are not going to have to get up and do that scary thing. We can do that piece of it, But what I do need from you is to help us identify folks, and then we can take them through that lengthier cultivation cycle where you are getting to know us, you're getting to know our problem, you're getting to know our programs, you're
Mm-hmm.
getting to really deeply understand our plan. And that's why the cultivation piece takes so long. And I don't necessarily mean, right, you sometimes you have donors who are like, just I don't have any time, like just ask me
Right.
for what you need, right?
Yeah.
You need to listen and understand who you've got at the table. But for the everyday, right, donor, they need to be taken along that journey. And then
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be ready. So what do you need, right? I see that you've got this budget. What are you looking for? And then we can slide them right into that invitation to give. And then uh, on the stewardship side of things, please don't ghost your donors. Please
Right.
don't do it. And I find that it's so counterintuitive, Tosha. I find that a lot of folks feel too busy to do stewardship really well,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, thank God I got the gift. I got to move on to the next one, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, because you don't have a clear
Right.
plan. You don't know
Right.
who you're be talking to. You don't understand what types of gifts and at what levels and what is our actual budget and how are we going to do this again. So you
Right.
feel in that hamster wheel. And then you forget about stewardship and it gets pushed down, down, down the to-do list. Oh, I'll
Yep.
send a handwritten note later. I'll make that phone call later. And guess what? And I've been there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Freely admit I've been there. You don't do it. Um, and you are really robbing yourself of one of the most joyful parts of the
Of
work.
the work. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just steward your donors, thank them. Um, and thanking them doesn't have to look like falling over yourself in,
Okay.
oh my gosh, you like without you, nothing is possible. It's like, okay, well, listen, y'all at the nonprofit are doing a whole lot. You're doing it in partnership with the donor. And so
Mm-hmm.
stewardship can look like, hey, you know what? I just wanted to tell you about this incredible thing that, Jane did at the program the other day. And we really were able to do this so much more efficiently, whatever the story is, right? And
Right.
thanks so much for being a partner with us in this because, it's so important that we have folks like you supporting the work that we're doing. And we couldn't do it if we didn't have all these partners working together. And so it doesn't have to feel, you know, like contributing to that, like, oh, we're just begging for money kind of vibes. And thank you, thank
Right.
you. Without you, nothing could happen. But it does look like joyfully sharing the impact that y'all are creating together. And so don't forget to do that. It not only deepens the relationship with the donor, but it refills your cup. And so
Yeah.
many people right now in the nonprofit sector, they need it because it's tough
They
out.
definitely
It's tough out
They they definitely need it. I'm always interested on this particular part of like stewardship and cultivation because, and I've had different conversations in other podcast episodes about this experience. And as I kind of shared offline, I go to a lot of events. I make a lot of donations because I'm, in and around like hundreds of nonprofits all of the time. And when I hear advice like this, I could see where it can be really powerful. But I'll be honest with you, I rarely see that show up in real life. And this is not trying to be like a slam on development directors and all of that. But to your point, how do you slow down to speed up? How do you create intentional time with donors in order to nurture that relationship and build upon that next ask? And admittedly, I would suspect the chronic turnover in these positions that none of us are all like surprised or immune to, right? Probably has a bear. By the time that you're getting your bearings in place as a development director, you might be thinking about leaving. Like, what have I done with my life? What choices have I made that led me to this place right now? So I think that is a big challenge for the nonprofit sector as a whole.
Mhm.
But I could see absolutely the kind of plan that you've laid out or some of the tips that you're giving would be completely transformative for a nonprofit because it's just you might think you as an organization, you're like, I know we've been meaning to do more of that. Like we've really fallen behind. We don't have really good process for that. But I promise you that no one else is doing it either. And I think that even speaks to if you do start doing it, it's really going to be a standout because I would imagine most people that are contributing to your organization, you're not the only one. And if they're starting to see, wow, this is very different experience, there is going to be a deeper connection there. There just is.
For sure. And two things I want to kind of share on that note are one, I find that often this doesn't happen because we don't create the time and the space for it. So I am a
Yeah.
huge advocate for time blocking. And so what I would do when I was an executive director, I had a weekly appointment on my calendar on Fridays. That was the gratitude power hour. And in that hour, I would write a thank you note. I would pick up the phone and make a call. I would just do, however many I could get in the hour. And then I needed to move on to the next thing. But I will tell you, I mean, even just giving myself that hour,
Mm-hmm.
it was absolutely transformational, the depth of relationship, and again the restorative power for myself.
Right.
Like, all right, I'm going to tackle another tough week, um
Right. Good way
because
to end the week, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah,
Good tip.
exactly, and
Like,
just
this is why I did all of that all week. Okay.
yes,
Now I can go home for the weekend and feel
yes.
recharged on Monday.
Yep. And if you're someone who needs it like on, maybe you put it bookend it, do it Monday and Friday, right? A half hour and a half
Right.
hour so that you can start off your week with gratitude as
Mm-hmm.
well. So absolutely time block that time. This is a note more specifically to executive directors. As someone who spent, 15 plus years in the development place before I was a leader, look at those job descriptions and make sure that there is time for that. People can't do stewardship if they can't do stewardship because you've got them grinding
Right.
100,000 things. That is
Right.
realistic, comes back into play, right? And oftentimes that really does have to come from the top unless you've already built a more collaborative culture. And if you have, good on you, that is also transformational.
Right.
Uh, but really make sure there is actual time for that. And then the other piece that I would say is I really found when I was an executive director and I was kind of drinking from the fire hose at the beginning. I took a moment. I was like, okay, I need to get back to my superpowers. What are my superpowers? Because all throughout my career, anytime I changed a job, my dad would we'd be having a conversation and he'd be like, how do you go in and you make, you generate so much more revenue than the guy before you, like
Mm-hmm.
every time? And I'm like, I don't know. I just systems and structure, man, systems and
Mm-hmm.
structure. And
Yeah.
that is just who I am. I am systems and structure. And if you can if you can take something like a free Notion account, right, or whatever project management software you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
use, um or in your donor CRM, if you've got one of those, once the donation comes in, it needs to be someone's responsibility on the team to then plot out those stewardship
Right.
touch points and put them on the calendar, because guess what? You're gonna get busy. So you need to
Right.
put those rocks before the sand and make sure you're tending to folks who have committed and made that contribution, and they RSVP'd, right, to your
Yeah.
invitation. They've said
Mm-hmm.
yes. Make sure they come back again, and that takes making sure you take the moment to enter that into whatever system works for you, to ensure that it doesn't continue to slip through the cracks.
Completely agree. We've talked about so many good nuggets, and the kind of last thing that comes to my mind around all this conversation, and I often say this in podcast episodes because we like to, it's like shock and awe, like, oh my God, now I'm completely overwhelmed. You've reminded me of all the things I've been failing to do. But I like to start with, the next best thing that someone can do, as Glennon Doyle would say. What is the next best thing I can focus
Yes.
on? Um, for those that are listening that have really kind of taken a bit of an inventory on what you've been mentioning, and yes, I need to get some more structure. I need to slow down to speed up. I need to put your strategic framework in place. I definitely need to do a better job of cultivation, whether it's me or my team. But what would be the thing that you would recommend a nonprofit leader to start? Like, where would we start? What's the first step?
Yeah. All right. So I have the tactical answer, but before we get to the tactical answer, and this sort of just came to me as you were talking about it the way you were, And I'm thinking about my kids and when they
Hmm.
get really overwhelmed with what, I've got a 10-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. My 10-year-old daughter
Mm.
sometimes gets really overwhelmed. I got this project and this thing, and right, it's
Yes.
all so much. And my
I have a
6-year-old,
10-year-old daughter too, by the way.
oh,
So I'm like,
okay,
yes, I know
solidarity,
what
and
you
I'm sending
mean.
you energy.
Yes.
It's an interesting new phase we are entering here. My 6-year-old too, he when we play Switch together. He really enjoys that. And sometimes he'll get so frustrated with something in the game that he like can't do and say, this is impossible,
Yeah.
And I can hear, the listeners of your podcast saying, like, cool, Mandy, but this is impossible. I'm already
Right.
drowned. What do you mean? And I tell my kids two things. One, let's just close our eyes and
Hmm.
take 3 deep, intentional breaths. Re-regulate yourself.
Hmm.
Right. I talk really fast and I get really excited and like the energy can be frenetic, but it is so important to just take a moment, take
Hmm.
those 3 breaths. And as you're doing that, and this is the piece that I say to my son all the time is be kind to yourself. But this is a
Yeah.
new game. This is a new chat. We're on a new level. We're on a new mission. Be kind to yourself. This is hard. It's
Right.
not easy. Um, and if it wasn't easy, right, it wouldn't be fun. It wouldn't be challenging. It wouldn't keep us engaged. So take 3 breaths, be kind to yourself, know that you're not alone. And then, in terms of the tactical advice, take a look, download that ebook, grab
Yeah.
the formula, the problem statement formula, and pop it into ChatGPT. Say, hey, this is my organization. Here's our mission statement. I want you to fill in the blanks of this problem statement formula, and
Mm.
see what comes out. What
I love
resonates.
that.
Check your facts, check your resources, check the citing, right? If it pulls any like statistics for you, make sure those are accurate, current, all the things. It is a robot. After all, we need to check its
Hmm.
work.
Hmm.
But get clear about that because it not only helps you articulate it to the donor, but it reminds you what you're doing and if you are aligned in what you're doing and if you can clearly understand, okay, hey, there is a problem here and we are working to solve it. So start with that problem statement. It's the very first step. Even if you think you have it down pat, look
Even
at,
if you think. And
yeah.
trust the feedback. Be open-minded because I suspect people are going to see something completely different than how they would explain it. And I love that you give this advice. And sometimes I wonder, am I just, a branding snob? Why do I get so hung up on really wildly smart nonprofit leaders when they speak about the work they're doing? And I talk to many, many, many nonprofit leaders, and I like to think I'm like pretty smart person. And I just tell myself, like, what are you saying? Like, what are you saying to me? I don't understand. And it's interesting. Little shameless, like, tangent. I went to a panel discussion a few days ago, and I heard different individuals speak, all like really powerful organizations, all really interesting. And I could tell that the leader that was speaking, a lot of the ways that you've described in terms of like very specific numbers, very concise, like very clear, very plain English, that message was really, really, really resonating with the audience in a way that a few other individuals that were speaking about their organizations were just speaking with lots and lots and lots of words to
Mhm.
probably describe really important work, but no one would really understand it in a way that this other organization was just like very matter of fact, plain English, like, okay, I get it. And then I talk to leaders all the time. So I like to think I'm like probably better than the average of like understanding a lot of these acronyms. When you say SNAP, I'm like, know what that is, like
Yeah.
know what, evidence-based programs are and like all these different things. CARF or like wherever, you're getting accredited. Like I know a lot of lingo. And if I have a hard time really understanding, I'm like everyone else in this room is just completely lost. So I love that piece of advice. And it kind of validates maybe I'm not such a branding snob after all. We really, really have to break it down in simple, like plain English words, not just for people to understand it, but for to really connect with them. And
That's, yeah.
I think during that conversation, not only does it matter that people understand, but how quickly they can connect with what you're saying in that conversation, I think matters. And so
Yep.
when they're spending there's like these really interesting books out there that talk about like the brain power that people put into the initial part of the conversation to understand what it is you're even saying. It's almost like they can't make that emotional connection with the words because they're just trying to figure out, why am I in this conversation and what is this person saying to me and what do I do with it? There's
Yep,
so much like mental work done in those first few minutes, that I think it does organizations a disservice. So anyway, sharing all
totally.
that because I find myself on the receiving end of it a lot. And I think it's awesome that you lifted that up and created a really cool tool for people to use ChatGPT, which I love also. Mandy, how do people find that tool that you
Yes.
mentioned? Where do they
So
go?
absolutely. So they can go to Hello ODEO, which is helloodeo.com
Mhm.
/4P formula. And that's the number four. So helloodeo.com /4P formula. Also, definitely invite folks to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Mandy Moody, not more, Mandy Moody on LinkedIn. And I share snippets and tidbits. And right, this is all evolving. So more information is always out there. So for sure follow along. I post frequently there. Um,
Okay.
and yeah, just dig in. You know, all of you listening, if you're listening to Tasha's podcast, you are smart people doing
True.
incredible work, right? And like you can do this. And I know that right now, especially, it feels really tough. It feels really draining. But
Hmm.
you've got this, and you've got lots of people in your corner who are ready, willing, and able to help you out and to you know, ensure that you can do this stress or this scaling with less stress, right? We've
Love
got
that.
our back. Yeah.
I love that. Mandy, I'll just do one more, shameless plug for following you on social media and downloading that book because I've heard so many leaders saying that they wish they had time to sit down and be more strategic with their organization. I think many leaders recognize now is especially important to be strategic. But I think sometimes in that conversation, I also hear, I don't know how to sit down and be strategic. I don't know how to get my hands or my arms around all of these like moving parts. So I think it is fantastic that you work with leaders of nonprofits specifically on this thing, how to put strategic systems in place to make their organizations run more effectively, which hopefully improves their bottom line or top line, all
That,
the lines. We
all
need
the
all the
lines,
lines.
all the lines. And it
Yeah,
all
yeah.
then goes back to that mission, right? When that one of the things that I used to say all the time as a leader is like, it is amazing that our revenue grew from 750K to nearly 2 million. But what is
Hmm.
even more incredible is that more than 500,000 new folks were coming to experience our programs. And
Right.
six figures of food assistance was going into communities and supporting the farmers who were growing that food through these programs. So it really all drives back to the people, and folks are so heart led who do this work that that's what I would invite you to let guide you, right? If you're like, oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff, but let your heart guide you and know that this time that may not feel that you are doing the thing that's going to help your community, it absolutely is doing the thing that is going to help your community in a much faster way because you are going to be able to put some of this stuff on autopilot once you've got the systems and structures in place.
Let's hope. Let's hope for sure. We need as many things on autopilot as possible.
That's right, for sure.
Mandy, thank you again for this conversation. It's been really energizing and a great way to end my week, at least. For those of you that are listening, you know, I do this every episode. Shameless plug for interacting with our content in any way possible because it makes content like this more searchable, findable, whatever it is the algorithm world, the meta world does. Just interact with it in some way if you found this interesting. And more importantly, hop on over to Mandy's website, download that ebook. I think you're going to find some really tremendous tips there. Thank you again, Mandy. And we'll see you all next time. Bye now.